So now we've styled the background. We've done some stuff with the lighting. So let's talk a little bit about how things are getting to you. So we're talking about the camera, which is going to take this signal that is now lit up and translate it into a digital thing that's going to be sent to you. Now, we all know that what a webcam looks like, so I'm not going to spend some time on webcams. What I am going to say is a webcam has one big drawback. It's the size of the hole. Now, what I mean by that. In cameras, we talk about something called an f-stop. And an f-stop is in essence the idea that the iris or the diameter of the hole that goes into the camera where light can come through is as big as possible. The moment that is big, it shortens our field depth. So relatively to the length of the lens, not really important, the size of the hole is important. So if I only want my eye to be in focus, and I've got a nice camera that focuses on the eye, then that will always stay in focus with my autofocus, but then my ears really start going out of focus, and so does the chair, and by the time it gets to the background, it is only interest. It doesn't hold anything other than that. Now, why do I say that? A green screen setup is very difficult to be portable. So it's easier to just take a camera and make sure you can style your background a little bit. It can happen in a hotel, it can happen at your grandmother's place, it can happen at your mother-in-law's place, your father-in-law's place, or even that friend that you're not so fond of but have to go visit for some or another reason. In their house, you can find a corner that you can make a little bit stylized, and by adding this field depth or bokeh effect, it allows you to phase those things out in the background, make them a bit hazy, and so they're not as important, and the focus stays with you. And with a nice camera, that can always be done. So I will never recommend a webcam. Don't ask me ever what kind of webcam I would like and use and everything else. The ones that I use are very functional. They're there to show a piece of paper on my desk that I can swap to show people what I'm drawing or something like that. It is not something I work with. Even when I'm going on tour or on the road and I'm speaking in different countries, I always take a small little Canon M50 Mark II with me, and that is my weapon of choice, because I've got a clean HDMI on it, so I can run it into something like an Atom, or I can run it straight into my computer through something like the Elgato Ecamm, or I can run that with as a webcam with a USB port. And because the quality of the depth of color is so good on those kind of cameras, even when I use that and the resolution is worse than most webcams have right now, or the ones that are built into your laptop, people still think it's a great quality image, because platforms like Zoom or Teams or Google Hangouts, all those will compress the image, modify it a little bit, make sure that they can get the maximum through so you can hear the sound clearly and you at least can follow the lips, but they don't really give you the opportunity to go high resolution. So instead of going really high resolution, you can rather have a little bit more bit density with color depth. It makes it look a lot more natural as well. So when it comes to lights, another question I get is, what about ring lights? So I'm just going to say no, okay? If you want to know more why, it's great for makeup. If you want to be a makeup artist and you're going to be showing people lipstick, lip gloss, the way that base fades out the face and hides all the little cracks in your face, sure, okay? I've just accepted the fact that I'm getting older and the cracks are going to show, and I'm embracing it with my lighting. You can hide it by giving yourself much more even lighting, but that also looks much more flat and less natural and less flattering in other ways. So up to you how you play with that. So we talked a little bit about cameras and the hole going into the camera. That also means the lens should be able to make use of that. So look at your f-stops, usually on lenses between about 25 millimeters and 85 millimeters. We don't really play with more than that when we're speaking from a home studio or from within a hotel room. And look at your f-stop for anything under 2.8 on the bottom end of things, because we don't want the 2.8, 1.8, 2, so it's fine, 1.4, 1.2, but the 1.2s and 1.4s can get a bit more expensive. But there's also quite small lenses you can take with. So like for instance, the 25 millimeter that comes standard with the Canon M50 Mark II is a nice little puck size. It's really small, and it does a really good job. I think it's about 2.8 if I remember correctly. So part of this little session I'm doing with you today is there's also going to be a handout. So make sure that Monica and the team gives you the handout, but that'll be digitally available, where most of these things are summarized and a little bit of extra information as to brands, for instance, or to model numbers of things that I use or that I like. So now we've talked about camera, we've talked a little bit about lens. The one thing we need to also understand about cameras is the size of the sensor. So the size of the sensor, so let's imagine it is the size of your thumbnail. If I put HD or 1080, so 1920 by 1080, 1080 pixels on there, so little dots on there that pick up the light, that is going to be quite tough to pick up a lot of light. But now imagine that is the same resolution, so the same amount of dots, but the size of my pinky, or the pinky nail. What if I now say I'm going to, in that same pinky nail, I'm going to say I want to put in 4K. So that's 2160 by, etc. So it's a case of you double the pixels, all right? But remember, it's 4 times as many because you multiply the rows by the columns. So now I have 4 times as many pixels in there in the same size. So the bigger the sensor size, all right, and the lower the resolution, well, the bigger the dots basically become, because if the resolution stays the same and the sensor size becomes bigger, the more light will be captured by every sensor, which means in rooms like a hotel room, in venues where we basically speak, in hotels or in corporate venues, there's always a problem with light. So if your camera cannot capture decent light, you get that either your face is going to be blown out because stage lighting is going to hit your face and your whole face is going to be white and the rest of you is going to be in shadow. And if your camera cannot distinguish between that, so the lights and the darks, and it cannot pick up enough light in slightly darker conditions, it's going to be problematic for you. So think about those. I like, as I said, the Canon M50 Mark II, and to get that extra bit of light in there, I like using something called the Viltrox Speed Booster, which gives me a little bit more light, and I use a little nifty 50 from Canon, so relatively cheap lens, 1.4, 1.8, 50mm lens. Good enough, cheap and cheerful, and it works like a charm. All right, so what have we covered? We've covered sensors, we've got lights, we've covered the characteristics of lenses, we've talked about the focal lengths that are great. Now, the one thing we haven't talked about is microphones. So please go and think about what cameras do you have available, what lenses do you have available, do you have about $1,000 available so you can buy yourself a camera with lenses and everything else and kit that part out? If not, can you save for that instead of buying a webcam? Can you work with what you have right now till you can save for something that's a little bit better? Okay. Think about that. Write down some ideas of what you want to do in the next few months. Remember, Black Friday is coming up in November, and then we have Christmas coming up, so beg your family for a camera if needs be, or a lens. Lens tends to be more important even than a camera. And then you also have the big sales happening in January because everybody's returned stuff. If none of those places are going to give you your price point, think about things like bankruptcy auctions. With economies at the moment running up and down, there are companies that are not making ends meet. And when they don't, they sell their stuff off. So look at the bankruptcy auctions around you or the auction houses and see what they have and put your name on a list to be notified if there's any camera equipment that comes up. I've actually bought quite a lot of camera equipment, studio equipment, lighting and all those kind of stuff, especially in the beginning, from auction houses because it was just easier to get set up very quickly with relatively good stuff, but for very cheaply. All right. So have a try out on that. And we're back in a second to talk about microphones.